Hey everyone, welcome to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. We are coming to you, as always, courtesy of our broadcasting partner, moretalk.tv. Joining me this week on the show is M.K. Welsh. M.K. Welsh is a 40-year student of the Edgar Cayce information and an accomplished writer who has spent the majority of her professional career in the non-for-profit arena, helping dedicated people engender positive change in the world. MK is a lifelong spiritual seeker. She has served on the board of trustees for the Association for Research and Enlightenment and written for its magazine, Venture Inward. Her latest book, Sacred Journey, Edgar Cayce, the Bible, and the Path to Enlightenment, weaves together a beautiful true story of our souls, our purpose, and our potential with ideas drawn from the Cayce readings and, of course, supportive passages from the Bible. This unique work of hers begins with Atlantis and the Garden of Eden and explores topics such as ancient history, meditation, reincarnation, and karma. It opens up a window on your important soul mission and how you too can find the path to enlightenment. We're going to be talking about a lot of these topics here on the show today. MK Welsh, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Wonderful. And MK, I understand that you recently wrote a book that is entitled Sacred Journey, Edgar Cayce, the Bible, and the Path to Enlightenment. I was curious, can you tell us a little bit about how this book came about?
Sure. You know, I have been a long-time student of the Cayce material, and there are many, many wonderful books written about it, and quite a few of them helped me in my own journey in life. I guess the impetus for this really was several years ago when a good friend of mine said that she had started to explore the Cayce material, and it was just difficult for her to understand and kind of put the pieces together and get the big picture and see how it was all relevant to her life. But she wanted to understand more. And I thought to myself, well, somebody should really write a book about that. And kept waiting, and after a lot of procrastination, decided maybe I'm supposed to write that. So what I was really trying to do with the book was to piece together the story of the soul and its passage through the earth. Why are we here? What are we supposed to be doing with the lifetime we're given? And my overarching goal, was to try to weave together the disparate themes and guidance from the Edgar Cayce readings that were actually given to a variety of individuals over, probably 40-plus years when he was doing his readings, and they were young, old, rich, poor, and all of these different people came to him for different reasons. They wanted help in a certain way. So they're bits and pieces of the story of the soul populating all of the readings, and my effort was to try to bring those together in a cohesive whole, so to speak.
Wonderful. And MK, you talked about how going back to the beginning and doing your research for this book, you wanted to find out what Cayce had to say about the soul's journey. So I'm curious, for our listeners who aren't familiar with the Cayce material, what does Cayce say about the beginning of where a soul originates? What's unique about Cayce's perspective on that?
Well, Cayce's perspective is that every soul was created in the beginning. We were a spark of God that was spun off, so to speak, in the universe. The first soul was the one that we call the Adam soul, who eventually became Jesus of Nazareth. But we were all created at the same time, and really what most religious traditions call the fall of man was really the soul's coming to this place with three dimensions, this place of materiality, and kind of getting stuck here. We decided as souls to start playing around with matter. And as we did so and tried to be creators, we got a little bit stuck and found it more and more difficult to get out of the matter that we had started to create with. And what the Jesus soul came to do was to help show us a way out again and back to that state of consciousness that's the pure consciousness that we were when we were just souls. Excuse me.
Excellent. And you talked a bit about Jesus, and this is a topic that I really want to touch on, because I think the Cayce perspective when it comes to the life of Jesus and the purpose of that soul in particular incarnating, I think is a really amazing perspective that could help benefit a lot of individuals. So in saying that, how does Edgar Cayce's view of Jesus differ from maybe most mainstream religious views?
Well, I talk in the book about the fact that Edgar Cayce changes the idea of Jesus from an idol to an ideal that we can follow. He looks at the man Jesus, as, just as I mentioned before, as a soul who had trod the earth many times to learn and develop until he was finally able to reach the heights of perfection and become what we call a Christ. And to me, this is an idea that really offers unending hope for all of us. The readings tell us that the soul became the Christ in its lifetime as Jesus of Nazareth, again, was the first soul created. And so he is our elder brother. And he entered to the earth again at that time, more than 2,000 years ago, to show us, his brothers and sisters, the way back to the state of God consciousness. So Casey also presents a picture of a Jesus that's truly part of the human community. He talks about how he studied as a young man, the fact that he laughed and eats and enjoys other people. He was part of a family. His challenging moments during his lifetime. He's abandoned by some friends. But he also fully manifested the soul forces that were inside him in all their magnificence to teach and to heal. You know, Jesus said in the Bible, "Be perfect as I am perfect," but most people believe that's impossible. But in fact, such an idea is consistent with the Casey perspective, which says it is possible, and that's really what we're here for. Jesus was the pattern we all could follow to try to raise our consciousness and live a perfected life. And the nice thing about the Casey readings, too, is that they talk about the fact that this doesn't have to become some kind of somber or humorless process, this movement through a lifetime. We don't have to be harsh or flagellate ourselves, that the way of the Christ could actually and should be joyful. So that, again, gives hope. And the other piece of that puzzle that I find a lot of hope into is that Edgar Casey was very ecumenical. He said Jesus was the man, and the spirit of Christ, or the God within him, that he manifested on earth is available to everybody, whether you call yourself a Christian or a Hindu or a Muslim, Buddhist or Jew, or even an agnostic. So he kind of turns the whole idea of that's been captured in the churches that, oh, Jesus was this entity over there that we could never really be like, into something that really is our elder brother.
Excellent. I love that perspective. And I'm curious, MK, based on your research and as you kind of look into the future, do you see this Casey perspective on Christ and the life of Christ and the purpose of that soul as being more of a mainstream incorporated idea? Do you see this as something that people will be embracing?
Well, I hope so, because, you know, as I said, it does give hope, and it's also just a much lighter way to go through life. I think the difficulty is, and you know, all of the mainstream religions, the truth is there. They're in the words, and hopefully in the book. One of the points I was trying to make is the words that Jesus spoke, these ideas are there. But it's been, in many ways, covered over with layer and layer of theology and all of those kinds of things. And now it's very hard to break through that kind of big wall of rules and regulations and theological principles, et cetera, et cetera. But I think if the seeds of this idea from Casey can be sown and enough people start to really pick up their Bibles and other things and look at it from that perspective, then it's going to grow. There's one, I use this analogy that Jesus had used in the book to say, you know, like a tiny mustard seed, if these ideas are planted, they will grow, but it's going to take some time. But eventually it will become a mighty tree. And so I'm hopeful that will be the case because, you know, quite frankly, it takes a burden off people's backs. It's like, oh, okay, I don't have to look at religion as some kind of heavy thing that I have to carry a monkey on my back, so to speak. So I'm hopeful about it.
That's a great way to look at it. I'm curious, MK, your book, subtitle include the term The Path to Enlightenment. And for most of our listeners, this may be kind of a traditionally Eastern term associated maybe with Buddhism. How does this phrase relate to the Casey readings for you?
Well, I guess for most of us, we often hear the word enlightenment, and at least I did for a long, long time, think about that you have to be some kind of religious guru sitting in a cold, dark cave, far away from the world, meditating day and night. And then, of course, we think, I could never do that, and most of us, including me, probably couldn't. And that is one way to go about trying to achieve a state of God consciousness, but it's certainly not the only way. I kind of like to think of enlightenment as, when you see one of those cartoon characters where suddenly there's a light bulb that goes up, is drawn above their heads, they have that aha moment. In essence, enlightenment to me means becoming conscious. And according to Casey, our elder brother Jesus, he was the one that laid down the pattern, as I said, for achieving this state. He taught us and showed us by example that enlightenment is really just being aware every moment of the day of the presence of omnipresent divinity within us and around us. His message was Emmanuel, which means God with us. So how do we reach that state? Well, the Casey material, along with most spiritual masters and traditions, both East and West, describe the process in relation to meditation. It's a major theme of the book, and this is precisely why it's considered so important. We need to go within to reach that very center of our being, to search for the place inside us where that spark of God resides. It's burning inside our soul, and what we're attempting to do in meditation is kind of, to put it, I don't know, maybe a crude analogy, to touch that holy fire. Then it becomes our responsibility to carry that candle flame of love into the world in whatever capacity we're called upon to fill. So that's what enlightenment is, it's becoming conscious to me of the God within, and then manifesting it, or trying to manifest it in the without, just as Jesus did.
Wonderful. I love that perspective. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
And I'm curious, MK, your book is titled The Sacred Journey. And for many people, this can be such a loaded term. The sacred journey, depending on where you're coming from, it can mean something totally different. So I'm curious, what exactly for you when you wrote this book, what did you mean to bring across as the sacred journey? And also, is everyone on the same journey? How does the journey tailor to each unique individual?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, Casey talks about our sacred journey or quest. It's been going on for a very long time. In essence, since the beginning of time as we know it. We talked a little bit earlier about how souls came here, or what the issues were, so to speak. And he says that every soul on earth is making a journey through consciousness, which is just the kind of thing I was referring to just a little while ago, back to oneness with our Creator, with our divine source. So it's really, the sacred journey is really that story in the New Testament. I'm not sure, most people might remember it, of the prodigal son. The son who had a very wealthy father and everything he needed. And then he decides to take his inheritance and leave the father's house and go out on his own and do what he wants to do. Well, a series of incidents occur and things don't go as well as he had planned. And suddenly he finds himself penniless, hungry, wanting to even eat the husks that they were throwing to the swine. And then there's a very telling phrase in the Bible. It says, he came to himself. So in other words, he suddenly became aware, like, oh my goodness, I don't have to be away from my father. I can go back and enjoy those things that were mine by virtue of my birthright. And so he goes back to his father's house, not knowing if he's going to be well received or not, but halfway there, his father sees him coming and comes and hugs him and gives him the ring, or royal ring, or whatever. And that's the journey that we're really on. We've gone away from our consciousness of God, and we're on the way back. And everything in our lifetime is helping to show us that way, even if it seems like, oh my goodness, how could this experience help me? All of it is trying to get us to wake up, understand. So in a nutshell, we're all on a sacred journey, whether we realize it or not. And each journey is unique, but each of them ultimately is headed to exactly the same place. And Casey also talks about the fact that our Father, which he's referring to as God, is very patient. And no matter how much time it takes or how many times we fall, he wants us back, and we're heading back there in consciousness, whether we know it or not.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And MK, you brought up the idea of reincarnation surrounding the idea of the soul that was Jesus. So I'm
Uh-huh.
curious, some of our listeners, is maybe a little bit of a new concept for them, the idea of reincarnation attached to Jesus. So what can you tell us about this that you brought out in your book?
Well, there's a chapter in the book called Enduring Soul that talks about some of the lifetimes that Edgar Casey said in his readings, again, scattered throughout different readings for different people, that Jesus spent on earth. According to Casey, he was Joseph, the son of Jacob, Joseph, the coat of many colors in the Old Testament. He also spent a lifetime as Joshua, and as Jeshua, one of the leaders who came back with the Jews from the Babylonian captivity. That soul also manifested on earth as Melchizedek. And another one was as Asaph, who wrote several of the Psalms. The point of the reading about Jesus' various lifetimes was to see this soul as also gradually learning, coming to consciousness on earth, i.e. in the third dimension, of who he really was, again, a child of God. And these lifetimes were the way he traveled his own sacred journey through various lifetimes, just as we are. So reincarnation is a big topic in the Casey readings. In terms of looking at the soul from the standpoint of it comes here to experience something, to learn lessons, and then leaves for a while, and then comes back again to refine and learn more lessons, etc. And also, in the meantime, each experience of reincarnation, every time we incarnate in this earth, we're with other souls, and we're helping them, and they're helping us. So the same thing applied to Jesus, and it was his lifetime in Nazareth 2,100 years ago, that really where he had achieved full consciousness of God, not just thinking about it. It was in him, it was embedded in him, and he could manifest that at will, which is the state of consciousness I think we're all hopefully heading toward as we reincarnate lifetime after lifetime.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. It's a very inspiring message, but it's so great to see. It really humanizes the soul that was Jesus, which I think is essential for people to really, I guess, for people to approach mainstream religion. You really want to make it to humanize Christ is really a special thing that the Casey perspective does. I'm curious though, MK. Why do you think mainstream religion dehumanizes Christ or puts it up, idolized, I guess you said earlier that the Casey perspective really idealizes Christ, whereas mainstream kind of idolizes Christ. Can you go a little more into that?
Yeah, the Casey perspective really holds up the Christ as an ideal, and they said Jesus, the man, reached this ideal. And I think it's difficult for the mainstream religions because if you it's easier to set somebody apart from you and to say, oh, this person, Jesus, he's completely different than we are. It kind of lets you off the hook. You don't have to, if you think, oh, there's no way, no how I could ever be anywhere close to what he did, and we all today, as I sit here thinking, I'm very far away from that, but it is possible to reach that level. It would, I think, kind of take away some of the foundation of the mainstream religions. And that's very kind of scary. Takes away people's jobs, frankly, and what they've believed in forever, where they felt very, very comfortable. This stirs things up in a different kind of way. Because if you take Christ down off the pedestal of saying, only he was God and none of us are like that, it changes everything. And I think that's what the Casey philosophy does, in my opinion. It changes everything, precisely because, as you mentioned, it makes this entity, this individual, someone who experienced exactly the same things we did, and yet overcame the world, overcame all of those things that are holding us back.
Absolutely. And I love the phrase you used in the title of your book, Path to Enlightenment. Even though this is traditionally, we've talked about an Eastern concept, it was very much a concept that filtered through the Casey readings in a lot of the readings. And what I like about the path to enlightenment is that many times it can be, I guess, viewed as like we're trying to get to a place, as if enlightenment is not an ever-going, ever-expanding path.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that you present it that way, because some people can think we're trying to get to a certain point where, okay, yes, I reached enlightenment, and you'll get there, and you'll feel it, and it'll be wonderful. But really, it's an ever-expanding path. And you also talk about the idea of expanding consciousness in your book. I know this ties hand in hand, but can you kind of clarify what the path of enlightenment means to you and how it is an ever-expanding of consciousness?
Sure. I think that, the path is, and I was thinking of it in terms of my writing, that, we enter Earth as a baby, and then we have all of these life experience, and in a sense, that's one path. That's our path, whatever that might be. Some of which we've chosen, some of the things we think, oh, I didn't choose that, but ultimately our soul probably did. But on that path, every experience, as I mentioned before, that we're going through is hopefully helping to lead us to a path, to the understanding and consciousness, full consciousness that God is here and God is within me. So because God's Spirit is limitless, you don't achieve a state that says, what people call enlightenment, says, okay, now game over, I'm there. It keeps expanding because it's a never-ending kind of, how do you explain God? You can't do that. It's totally a never-ending state. So what we're trying to do, and what Casey says, and I think it's relevant in reference to this, is that no one enters heaven except on the arm of someone that they have helped along the way. So as you expand your consciousness, as you grow more in understanding, and it keeps going and going and going because that's what God is, as you grow in understanding, we all are to take that understanding and help others on their paths. Some people have stumbled. Some people don't have, I have felt so blessed to have the opportunity to study these readings, but many, many people have never even heard the word Edgar Casey or anything like it. And just to have the opportunity to take what we know, what we have achieved in consciousness, and give a hand to somebody else in whatever way we can, that's the path continuing, and it goes on and on and on and on in a never-ending cycle of love.
I love that. Thank you. And MK, your book also emphasizes that each of us come here to Earth for a purpose, which is a real hallmark of the Casey readings. I think what brings people to spirituality and the idea of alternative spirituality is that they want to find a purpose as to, why do the highs and lows exist, and why are they so intense for me, and why is life giving me this, and how am I helping to be a co-creator? That's really what your book emphasizes, that each of us came here for a purpose. But can you talk a little bit more about that, and also how one would help to become, I guess, resonate more with their purpose and become more in touch with it?
Sure. We're just talking about the fact that we, through meditation or whatever, try to go within and touch that spark of God and then carry that spark outside into the world. But I think you can really divide it, looking at it through the lens of the Casey philosophy, you can really divide the subject of purpose into two parts. He talks very distinctly about the idea that there's a big picture purpose our souls have for coming to Earth, which Casey defines in essence as to know ourselves, to be ourselves, yet one with God. So what he's talked about in that phrase, and I've paraphrased it a little bit, is that we need to know ourselves as a spark of God, be ourselves, which is the individualized soul that we are, bring some individuation to it, but also know that we're one with the greater, with the whole, with the one, with God. Then the readings also talk about another more specific aspect of one's purpose. That's the unique, individualized contribution we're supposed to make while we're being here. Every one of us came to Earth in order to present a gift to the world to help lift up the whole. You might be an engineer who builds roads and bridges, a school teacher, a hairdresser, a homemaker, a radio host, or even a world leader. No matter what your life's path or particular career, your soul made a compact with the universe to be here and contribute your light through whatever expression you've chosen in this lifetime. The point, according to Casey, is to get up and do something wherever you are to make this world a better place because you've lived in it. So I think, and I go back again to things like meditation, if you start to get in touch with that soul within you, it is going to, you're suddenly going to have little intuitions. You're going to feel like almost there's something guiding you. It doesn't mean that you're going to be changing your job tomorrow, but I think you're going to get more and more in touch with that still small voice that speaks to you and says, this is why you came. And maybe you're in a situation that you really want to escape from, or, I think of the people who are, helping a loved one who's bedridden or whatever, and it's like, this isn't what I came. Well, if you really listen, sometimes you'll see that, this is why I came, to help this individual for this time on earth, or to do this. What we tend to do, especially in America, is to put everybody's purpose kind of in a hierarchy and say, that's better than that. And from a soul perspective, the only thing that matters is that you listen within for what you're supposed to do this moment and do it with all your heart and love that you can manifest. And sometimes it's the smallest thing. Sometimes it's smiling at somebody at the checkout counter. That's your purpose, your individual, unique skill, talent, ability, love that you can bring to the world.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. My thing, for me, always personally, when I wanted to find my purpose, it was always to look around at my life and look at what I love the most, what really lights me up and has me most passionate. And I think that'll help you to kind of lock into what your purpose is, or it will help you to, I guess, get a better grasp of what that is. I think so many people, for me, as we age through life, we lose touch with the things that we truly love, and sometimes we have to even go back to our childhood to even remember what those things were, because many times they can, in essence, be socialized out of us. But I think as far as our purpose, for me personally, it's always been to tap into those things that really light me up.
I think you're absolutely right, and if you look at your life from the perspective of, or any of us look at our lives from the perspective of reincarnation, some of the talents and abilities we brought into this lifetime are from other lifetimes. And the things, as you put it so eloquently, that light us up is our soul going, yeah, this is why I came. And so
exactly.
You're very right. We shouldn't ignore that at all, because that's part of the soul within us that's speaking to us all the time if we'll just listen.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing for me is that if for anybody out there who doesn't remember what lights them up, you can always ask the people who have known you the best, because sometimes we'll forget what we loved, earlier in our life, and other people remember, wow, you were really lit up when you were doing this. So if I could say anything to the listeners, I would say, chart that path in order to find, what really lights you up.
Very good idea.
But MK, moving on, I
Wonderful
want
idea.
to me, the whole ancient mysteries surrounding this, your book and the topics that you touch on out of the Casey readings is a really, I think, a fascinating topic for our listeners. I want to talk a little bit kind of the Bible, but going more towards the history of the soul as far as the Casey perspectives. I want to go back to Atlantis and the Garden of Eden, because you talk about both of these in your book, and I think these are two topics that aren't talked about enough, but also are just misunderstood. So can you give us the Casey perspective on these topics?
Sure. Casey talks about Atlantis, and actually throughout, among the 14,306 or whatever it is readings, there aren't that many on Atlantis, but it's certainly been a topic that has really, as you said, lights people up. But he talks about the souls in Atlantis, and he talks about that time as if our souls weren't completely, our bodies and the consciousness that we had here on Earth wasn't completely solidified, if that's the right word. We were still unbounded a little bit. We could come and go as we wished, and it was almost, I have the impression that the people at that time were very almost ethereal, and things like, excuse me, ESP and those kinds of things that we look at today as, super mysterious, etc., were actually just part of everyday life, because everybody was so close to, they weren't so embedded in matter. I guess that's the way I'll put it. He also talks about the first soul, which was Emilius, who ultimately became the Christ, as being in Atlantis. And I think I had mentioned early on the idea that souls began to play with matter and got kind of stuck. And in fact, some of the mythology in the world about things like satyrs and mermaids and things like that, Casey says are really from this kind of prehistory time where souls started to come into other entities, other beings, and inhabit them just to see what it felt like. And then they couldn't get out. So there were actually, individuals who might have had hoofs or wings or something like that. At a certain point, the first soul, Emilius, and some other souls knew that nobody was going to be able to escape this without some help. And so they took it upon themselves. He took it upon himself to say, I'm going to lead the souls back to God again. And at this point as well, and I don't have all of the timing because nobody knows exactly, but the decision was made that the soul needed a better vehicle in order to find its way back to God consciousness. And that's when you have the story of Adam and Eve, because that was the time when it said that God created this new vehicle, this body that we call human, in order that Adam and Eve and all the other souls had the opportunity to escape. And within this body that we carry around us is the lymph system and are what the Eastern traditions and Casey call the chakras. They are soul-sensitive centers in our very bodies that we carry around with us every day that help us to raise our consciousness to be one with God again.
Excellent. And MK, just to make this a little more practical, you ended there talking about raising your consciousness in order to bring it back to kind of the source, bring it back to God. And this, to me, is the essence of all spiritual practices. But I'm curious for somebody who really is looking to get that connection, to make that connection again, to feel that, looking to get back on the path of enlightenment. What recommendations do you give somebody who's kind of struggling to make that connection?
Well, I mentioned before meditation, but I also want to say to people that when you say the word meditation as well, some people think it's a big, formal, has to be, you have to sit there for hours, this and that, and that's not really the case at all. I think, first, one of the simplest things one can do is sit down and be quiet, especially in this day and age when we all have a cell phone in our hand, a computer there to look up anything we want, and our minds are going a mile a minute. What we need to try to do is to reach the silence, because it's in the silence that we will find our God. So one practical step someone could take is just to set aside some time every day to say, I'm going to sit down, turn off the phone, everything else, and even for 15 minutes, a half an hour, take a book that is sacred to you. Maybe it's the Bible, maybe it's a novel or quotes from someone, poetry, whatever, and sit there quietly and read it and try to take it in. Try to really, really focus on it. Additionally, there are teachers like Eckhart Tolle, and I think he's absolutely right on, that talk about being in the now. Whenever you can just stop for a moment, even in the middle of your workday, and bring yourself back and say, Where am I? Where are my thoughts? And try to bring yourself to this moment. It helps. And then to go back to meditation for a moment, don't let it scare you. Sit down in a comfortable chair, with your back straight if you can keep it straight or whatever. And again, just quiet down for a few moments. One of my teachers, he's passed on a long time ago, but his name is Joel Goldsmith, and he talked about do it at the beginning for 2 or 3 minutes. Just try to quiet the mind, because it's in that stillness, that very still place, that you will hear. In stillness, they say, you hear God. So silence is the only way. You've got to quiet down the cacophony of stuff going around you, and particularly the cacophony of stuff going on in your mind. And you start that with small steps. And if it doesn't work out so well the first time, don't be down on yourself. Don't worry about it. Just say, okay, I'm going to try again tomorrow because I know this is important. And suddenly, the more and more you listen, the more and more you'll hear, which is, kind of a strange thing to say, but true.
No, it makes sense. Absolutely. And I think the thing that I personally forget sometimes is that when I first started meditating, you got to look at it as you do everything else. For example, if you're a basketball player, you're not just going to pick up a basketball and be able to shoot hoops and dunk overnight. It's one of those things where you ease your way into it and you expand into it. Kind of, you see there's kind of this concentric expansion of just going deeper and deeper, I guess you'd say, with meditation. So many people have this expectation. It comes from also, I guess, a theme of impatience that seems to play out in us many times. But you can't, you got to be realistic about it. When you want to build up the muscle, you got to build up the muscle. It doesn't just happen overnight.
You're absolutely right. That is a great metaphor, because it's like everything. It needs some practice, and for most of us too, we are so looking at the outer world every moment of the day. This feels odd. It feels strange to say, oh my goodness, I'm going to sit down and kind of go within. So we really have to, as you said, practice the muscle, work the muscle.
Absolutely, yeah. And MK, we've talked about a lot of topics today. I'm curious, what are some of the other key ideas from the readings that are presented in your book that maybe we haven't touched on yet?
Well, I think it's interesting because, Edgar Cayce died in 1945, more than 70 years ago, and I feel like we're only scratching the surface of the depths and breadths of the material that came through him about the physical, mental, and spiritual aspects of life. Some of the ideas, besides things like reincarnation, is the overarching theme that life on Earth is an opportunity for soul growth. We should see it as that, and we should welcome it. The readings also very clearly add that whatever we happen to be meeting in our lives, we're meeting ourselves. These circumstances and conditions and situations that our soul has called to itself in this lifetime are to act as a mirror so that we can see and grow more. Cayce was really, really insistent about setting our ideals mentally, physically, and spiritually, and then living them out, of course. That's the readings philosophy. He also talks a lot about the power of the mind and the importance of keeping our attitudes and emotions in check. Yeah, of course, as you know, and I'm sure listeners know, there were thousands of physical readings given on health-related issues, covering all kinds of medicine and surgery and things that we might use. But the interesting thing about the readings is, and what Cayce says, is that all healing comes from within. It's the product of the creative soul forces that are alive right now in every cell of our bodies. I mean, that's huge, that idea, I think. And of course, underlying everything, the readings have a lot to say about the critical importance of love, and very clearly indicate that we are absolutely our brother's keeper. In fact, as I said before, we're only going to enter what we call heaven on the arm of somebody we've helped. So the idea of application is what Edgar Cayce calls it, or service, is a very, very big concept throughout all of the readings.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. If there was one thing I got from the Casey readings that really helped shift things for me, was that the importance of being of service and also helping others whenever the opportunity presents itself. Because we've talked about this a lot on the show, and we talk about it a lot with on the thought for the day for the show, is that life presents you with a ton of opportunities to be of service. It just matters whether or not you have the eyes to see it.
Wow, that is a very good point. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And I'm curious, MK, kind of a last question here. I know you've been involved with the nonprofit realm, and then also as a writer, you've just really been diving into your own path of enlightenment. So I'm curious, with your years of experience and looking at the uniqueness, Casey really talked about this time being a time of, it's going to be a time of turmoil, but also a time of incredible seeds are being planted that are going to carry us into the future. New ideas are being rooted, new technologies, all sorts of things all across the field. But I'm curious, what has you most excited as you look at this unique time and then also kind of project into the future? What has you personally most excited, or even professionally most excited?
Well, I think personally, and again, talking in reference to the book, I see, if you look back over the last, 30 or 40 years or whatever, and you see the ideas which at Casey's time were new and nobody ever talked about, things like reincarnation and astrology and dreams and all of those kinds of things. Now you find them in places like the Oprah Show. So you can see slowly but surely that a lot of these concepts are getting into the collective consciousness, so to speak. And in that way, they have an effect. People, little by little, are starting to look at things a little bit differently than they may have in, like, the 1950s. And so that is something that those seeds have been planted, and they're already starting to grow. And I also see, it's interesting because I don't know that Casey talks about this too much in the readings, but gosh, you see some of the little kids, some of the souls that are coming to Earth now, the babies, and you see how conscious they seem already. I mean, they're light years ahead of where people were, say, 40 years ago when they were just a kid. And some of that, I think, is due to the fact that, as he had mentioned in the readings, that souls are wanting to incarnate now because there is a big shift taking place. There is a big shift in consciousness taking place. And while we can get very upset, and sometimes I still do, I try to stop myself, but I do, with things, you see some of the horrors that are going on in the world, I am so hopeful and know that part of that, I think, is just the breaking up of the old way, and this new way is coming through. It's almost like when you have an acorn, it has to be under a lot of pressure to break open and let the sprout come up, and suddenly it's this huge oak tree or whatever. And I feel like that's what's happening. So I try to hold on to what Casey said about having patience and not being overwhelmed by what's going on in the world, et cetera, because I do think that the seeds he planted and the seeds like the show that you're doing right now and have been doing for a while, which is planting those seeds out there. And as people walk away and carry them in their heart, the consciousness that they bring into the room changes everything for all of us. And it's wonderful because that consciousness is little by little just growing and will be a mighty tree one day.
Absolutely. Wonderful, inspiring message. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for mentioning our show. I appreciate that so much. MK, as kind of a last question, I'm curious, what do you hope people get from your book and the work that you put into the book? What's your hope for writing this book?
Well, I hope that for everyone for whom some of these ideas resonate, and that again is another thing I think I want to mention about Casey, which I always respected very much when he said, even about his own readings, if these don't resonate with you, stay away, because maybe it's not the path that your soul is supposed to be on. So for those whom these ideas may resonate, I hope they'll explore the book, especially people who may have issues with church dogma and how Jesus' words have been interpreted over the centuries, especially regarding things like the concept of sin and everlasting punishment. Casey has a lot to say, but he presents everything through the filter of love. It's the motivating, kind of generative factor underlying the universe, and it drives the Casey philosophy from start to finish, as you know. I hope readers will understand that they're beloved children of God, and they couldn't never do anything to sever their connection with their Creator. My other sincere desire is that people will find some hope in this book by understanding that life is continuous and we don't have to fear anything, even this thing that we've labeled death. When we exit this planet, Casey says we're merely entering into another stage of soul growth. No matter what we've done or have done or will do in the future, we always have another chance to rectify our mistakes and come to know our God. So I think for me, I hope somebody will pick it up, and even if they only read 2 pages, hope is the operative word. I want folks to take away, to offer them something that will make them rise out of themselves a little bit in the daily life that they have and say, there could be something more. And if I'm successful in doing that with even one individual, I feel like the work that I put in, and I was thankful, grateful to be able to do it, that will have all been worth it.
Excellent. Well, MK, thank you so much. Your work is truly inspiring, and you've been one of my favorite guests. It was truly a pleasure to have you on the show. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of your incredible knowledge. It's been fun. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Brent. I appreciate you having me, and thank you very much.
Of course, we'll give our listeners a link to check out your book that's out now. It's entitled Sacred Journey, Edgar Cayce, the Bible, and the Path to Enlightenment. MK Welsh, thank you so much for being with us today on Reflections.
Thank you.
Take care. MK's book, Sacred Journey, Edgar Cayce, the Bible, and the Path to Enlightenment is out now. You can pick up your copy at arecatalog.com. On behalf of everyone here at the Association for Research and Enlightenment and MoreTalk.tv, thank you so much for tuning into Reflections, the wisdom of Edgar Cayce. Hope everyone has an enlightened day and a great week. Much love. Now it's time for the Thought for the Day today here on Reflections. And joining me for the Thought for the Day today is Dr. Bill Austin. Bill, welcome to the show.
Greetings, Brent. Thank you for having me. It's always great to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the show again, Bill. If you can go ahead and read the excerpt that we picked out today for the Thought for the Day from the Cayce readings.
I'd be happy to. This thought comes from reading 2172-1. Show due consideration as to how much you owe the world, rather than as to how much the world owes you. The world owes every individual only an opportunity to express itself. Its ideal of the creative forces and its ideals of the creative forces, which will find expression in the manner we treat our fellow men. This is a beautiful reading. The world doesn't owe us anything. In a sense, it's giving us an opportunity. We elected to come into this world. And during this sojourn, we have the opportunity to express ourselves and our ideals. And if those ideals are centered on the creative forces, on God, on this all-powerful force, I think good things will come of that. And that expression of ourselves, that expression of our ideals, what's really important to us, what's our measuring stick, is going to be expressed in how we treat other people. I am my brother's keeper.
Yeah, I love this one. To me, it makes me think of how so often kind of we can fall into the role of playing, I guess you call it like a victim complex. It would be kind of playing the victim to one's external circumstances, sort of blaming everyone and everything for creating the conditions that are dictating our internal state of peace and happiness. And I see that so often. This really addresses this. It explains that the conditions around us are not what should be dictating our happiness and dictating our internal state of peace. One of the other things I really liked about this that resonated with me was this immediately brought up another quote from a famous historical figure that actually occurred after this had come through Casey. And I noted that it reminded me of an American politician who famously said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And to me, this was exactly what Casey was saying. Casey clearly states that we're not here on earth to satisfy selfish desires. Although we can often veer off course and get stuck in kind of playing patterns out of selfish desires, eventually those will play themselves out and we'll have to, find a more enlightening path. But Casey says we are here to be of service to our fellow men and in whatever capacity our environment presents to us. And he explains that really, if you want the way I look at it personally is, if you want a measuring stick of how well you're doing, it's how you're treating others. How do others, how are others perceiving you? Are you treating others the way that you would like to be treated? The old adage, that's what it's really all about. And that's what Casey says. You're understanding how much you understand the law, the creative forces, God, whatever you want to call it. It will be shown clearly in the way that you treat other people. So if, I can't say it any plainer than that. I've always seen that to be the case. And Casey stated it very clearly, so if you find that you're not treating people very, if you're not treating people well, you need to take a good hard look at yourself and, see, use that as your reference.
Yes. I laughed when you talked about President John F. Kennedy, using this or a takeoff of this quote. I would like to fantasize and said, "Oh yeah, you got it from the readings."
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure that's true, but I think when there is a good thought, it's universally known. And I liked how you kept referencing back to the golden rule of how you treat other people. That'll be a good measuring stick that is a good measuring stick for everyone,
Yeah.
Because it all comes back to you, and if you want peace and gentleness, well, give peace and gentleness. You want kindness, give some kindness. And we have a wonderful opportunity during these sojourns to learn that principle. And to me, it seems clear that if we don't learn them, well, we'll probably be given another opportunity, and our job is to learn that principle of the golden rule.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you, Bill. And thank you, as always, for joining me for the thought for the day. It's always so much fun listening to your thoughts and getting to bounce my own thoughts back at you. So thank you so much, Bill.
Oh, I thoroughly enjoy it, Brent. Have a salubrious day today.
Thank you. You too.